The desert was not kind to the desperate. Its winds carried heat that stripped the body of strength. Its silence pressed on the mind until it echoed with fears louder than any sound. Clara James had not meant to run this far, nor had she planned for her journey to carry her into such merciless country, but when the mob came after her, there was no chance to think. There was only the sudden, pounding terror in her chest and her feet carrying her away from everything she had ever known. It had started in town just before sundown. The sheriff's voice cut through the chatter of the saloon like a gunshot. "There she is! That's her!" She had barely turned when a heavy hand clamped on her arm. Men's faces she had known since childhood, were twisted with suspicion, even hatred. Someone shouted that she had stolen from Mr. Walker's general store. Others cried that she had been seen lurking near the safe. Lies, all of them. Clara tried to protest, but in the frenzy of voices, her words were swallowed whole. The sheriff might have taken her in, given her a chance to speak, but Walker was a wealthy man. His accusations weighed more than the protests of a lone poor girl with no family left to vouch for her. In that moment, Clara knew justice in this town had already been purchased. If she stayed, they would drag her to a cell and perhaps a trial would follow. But the verdict had already been carved into their eyes. So she ran, through the back door of the saloon, down an alley, and out into the night. Boots clattered behind her, men cursing as they tried to keep up. She darted past hitching posts, knocking a lantern to the ground, startling horses into rearing. For one breathless instant, she thought she might be caught, but fortune was on her side. The dark edge of the desert loomed close, and the mob was less eager to follow her into the unknown. By the time she crossed the dry creek bed at the town's edge, her lungs burned and her legs trembled. She pressed forward all the same. The desert stretched ahead, a vast, unforgiving wilderness of rock, scrub, and shifting shadows. Somewhere behind her, the voices still shouted, but the night was swallowing them. Clara clutched her thin shawl tighter, her thoughts racing faster than her weary body. She had no horse, no food, no water, only her will to keep moving. The moon rose high, silvering the land in a cold glow. With every mile, Clara's anger tangled with her fear. How quickly they had turned against her. Not a single friend had spoken in her defense. She thought of Mrs. Whitcomb, who had smiled kindly at her that very morning, buying flour with a soft word of thanks. Had even she joined the chorus against her? Clara would never know. That part of her life had been severed, cut clean away the moment Walker pointed his finger. The desert night grew colder, and each gust of wind seemed to whisper of dangers ahead: coyotes, rattlesnakes, men who might still be tracking her. Yet, exhaustion carried her further than courage. By dawn her shoes were worn thin, and her lips cracked from thirst. The sun, pitiless and blazing, made the horizon dance with false promises of water. Clara staggered, clutching a low mesquite bush for balance, and whispered to herself, "Just a little farther. Just a little." She thought of her mother, gone these many years. Her mother's voice would have urged her to stay strong, to keep walking, to never let fear rule her heart. But it was hard to keep such memories alive when her throat burned with dryness and her stomach knotted in hunger. Clara's dress, once neat, now hung ragged, dust caking the hem. She was becoming part of the desert, another worn, brittle thing waiting to break. By the second night, she no longer knew if the footsteps she heard were real or born of her weary mind. Once she thought she saw riders on the ridge, silhouetted against the stars, but when she blinked, they were gone. Only the endless silence remained, a silence that weighed heavier than chains. Clara sank to her knees more than once, staring at the barren ground, thinking perhaps it would be easier to give up. Yet the memory of the mob's faces drove her on. Better to die free in the wilderness than to hang for a crime she had not committed. When dawn broke again, Clara was at the edge of her strength. Her world was blurred, the horizon shimmering in heat. She stumbled forward, her breath ragged, not knowing where she was headed anymore. She had fled town, escaped her pursuers, but at what cost? There was nothing left ahead, no water, no food, no path home. Clara James, once a girl of the town, was now a fugitive of the desert, and she had nowhere to go. The third morning in the desert dawned with a pale, colorless sky. The world seemed drained, as though even the sun hesitated to rise over such a barren land. Clara woke sprawled against a boulder, her body stiff, her lips split and bleeding from dryness. She had no sense of time anymore. Her sleep came in fragments, stolen in the hours when exhaustion conquered fear. Every time she closed her eyes, she half expected to open them to rough hands dragging her back to town, but no posse had come. Only the desert, vast and uncaring, kept her company. Clara pushed herself upright, swaying on weak legs. Her dress clung to her with sweat dust-caked in the fabric until it felt like armor made of sand. She licked her lips, searching the horizon for anything: a cactus, a trickle of water, even a bird that might hint at life nearby. Nothing. The desert stretched in every direction, rippling heat distorting its edges as if the world itself wavered. Between reality and dream. She walked because stopping meant surrender. Each step was an act of stubborn will. The land shifted subtly as she moved forward. Low ridges rose on either side, funneling her into a narrow wash where rocks piled in haphazard towers. The silence here felt heavier, as though the desert itself held its breath. Clara's instincts prickled. She slowed, scanning the ridges. That was when she saw him. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks again. A figure stood on the rise above her, still as stone, half blended with the rock and shadow. For a heartbeat she froze, unable to tell if he was real. Then the figure moved, slow, deliberate, unmistakably human. Clara's heart leapt into her throat. Her first thought was, the sheriff's men have found me. She turned, ready to flee, but her body betrayed her. Her legs buckled, sending her stumbling into the sand. By the time she forced herself up, he was closer. The man descended the ridge with quiet grace, each step certain, fluid, as if the land itself guided him. His hair was long and black, tied back with a strip of leather. His skin, darkened by sun and wind, bore no softness, only the hard truth of a life lived under open skies. He carried no rifle in his hands, but Clara could see a bow slung over his shoulder, a knife at his belt. His expression was unreadable, calm as stone. Yet his eyes followed her with sharp intensity. An Apache. Clara's blood ran cold. Stories in town painted them as ruthless raiders, merciless to outsiders. Mothers used their name to hush restless children. Men spat the word with contempt, sometimes fear. And now one stood before her, close enough that she could see the faint scars across his cheekbone, the steady rhythm of his breath. She tried to scramble back, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Don't, please." The man stopped a few paces away. He didn't draw his knife. He didn't move closer. He only regarded her in silence, his dark eyes taking her measure. The stillness stretched until Clara's trembling became unbearable. Finally, he crouched slowly, setting down a small pouch from his belt. With deliberate care, he opened it and drew out a water skin. Holding it in one hand, he extended his arm slightly, not all the way, but just enough that she could see. Clara's throat burned at the sight. Her body screamed for the water, yet her mind screamed louder. Trap. She stared at him, searching for cruelty in his face, some hint of mockery. But his gaze was calm, patient, as though he had all the time in the world. "You." Her voice cracked, little more than breath. "Why?" He tilted his head, considering her. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady, carrying the rhythm of a language not his own but learned with care. "You will die." A pause. Then he nudged the waterskin forward on the sand. The simplicity of the words struck her harder than any shout. No malice, no threat, only fact. Clara hesitated, every tale she'd been told warring with a desperate need clawing at her chest. She edged forward, hand shaking as she snatched the waterskin. The first swallow nearly choked her throat. Too raw to take it all at once. Tears stung her eyes as life returned in cool rivulets. She drank again, slower this time, until her trembling eased. When she looked up, the man was still there, crouched in silence, watching. Not a pursuer, not a savior either. Just a presence, solid and unmoving, in a world that had given her nothing but emptiness. For the first time since fleeing town, Clara felt something shift. Fear still gnawed at her, but it tangled with something else, a fragile thread of hope. Fragile as glass. She clutched the waterskin to her chest, whispering, "Thank you." The Apache warrior did not answer. His expression did not change. But he inclined his head once, the gesture subtle, as if acknowledging her survival without claiming her gratitude. Then he spoke again, his words soft, almost blending with the desert wind. "Walk, not here. Safer place." And though Clara's body screamed to collapse where she sat, she found herself rising to follow. Clara followed because she had no other choice. Her legs ached, her head throbbed, and every muscle begged for rest, yet the stranger's quiet command, "Walk, not here," pulled her forward. He moved with a surety that unsettled her, feet finding paths invisible to her eyes. The land seemed to part for him, while she stumbled after, clumsy and unsteady, clutching the waterskin he had given her like a lifeline. The silence between them weighed heavy. Clara wanted to ask where they were going, but fear pinned her tongue. What if he was leading her to others? What if she had stepped from one danger into another, exchanging the sheriff's rope for the Apache's knife? Every tale she'd ever overheard in town filled her mind, stories of ambushers, of travelers taken and never returned. She tried to convince herself those were only exaggerations, whispers fed by prejudice and fear. Yet the stories clung to her, sharp as burrs. He glanced back once, his gaze sharp but unreadable. "Slow," he said simply, as though noting her pace. His voice was steady, but not unkind. Clara bristled despite herself. I can keep up," she muttered, though. Her legs wobbled with every step. The faintest curve touched his mouth, not quite a smile, more like an acknowledgment. He didn't argue. He only turned forward again, leading her deeper into the winding wash where tall rocks rose like sentinels on either side. Shadows fell cool across the path, a mercy against the rising sun. When they reached a cluster of boulders, he stopped abruptly. With practiced movements, he knelt and touched the ground, running his fingers lightly over the sand. Clara stared, uncertain, until she realized what he was doing, searching for tracks. Her breath caught. Was someone else here? Was he tracking her pursuers? He straightened at last, meeting her gaze. "No man," he said, "only deer." Clara exhaled, tension easing only slightly. Still, unease gnawed at her. Why did he help her at all? Why hadn't he left her to the desert? "You could have just walked away," she said quietly, hugging her arms around herself. "You didn't owe me anything." The Apache studied her. For a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he said, "You were dying. That's not your problem." "Now it is." His words, delivered so calmly, unsettled her more than anger would have. She didn't know what he meant, didn't know what he wanted. Gratitude tangled with suspicion, her heart pulling in two directions. They rested in the shadow of the rocks. He offered her a strip of dried meat from a pouch. Clara hesitated, staring at it as though it might be a trick. Her stomach growled, betraying her. At last she accepted and chewed slowly, each bite easing the hollow ache inside her. "You are afraid," he he said after a time, his tone not accusing, only observing. Clara stiffened. Of course I am. Why shouldn't I be? His gaze held hers steadily, calm and unblinking. Because I have not harmed you. You could, she blurted before she could stop herself. You could, any moment. For the first time, his eyes flickered, not with anger, but with something she couldn't name. A shadow of sorrow, perhaps, or resignation. Yes, he said. But I will not. The simplicity of his words disarmed her. Still, distrust coiled in her chest. In town, people smiled as they lied. They looked you in the eye as they betrayed you. How could she believe a stranger whose world was so far from her own? She looked away, clutching her shawl tight. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done. I know enough, he replied softly. That startled her. She turned back sharply. And what is that supposed to mean? He studied her again, as if measuring his words. You run from men, they hunt you. Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to protect her pride, but the truth was too raw. She lowered her gaze. They say I stole, she whispered. But I didn't. I swear I didn't. Apache inclined his head, not in doubt, not in belief, but in acknowledgement. Does not matter here, he said. Clara blinked, startled. All her life, the weight of accusation had mattered. It shaped who lived freely and who was cast out. Yet here, in the shadow of the desert rocks, this man dismissed it as though the words of her accusers meant nothing. Confusion swelled alongside her suspicion. She did not know whether to trust him or herself. The sun shifted overhead, shadows creeping across their shelter. At last he rose and adjusted the bow at his shoulder. Come, he said. We go. Clara hesitated, fear prickling anew. But when she glanced back at the endless wasteland behind her, she knew she had no choice. For now, distrust would walk beside her. And so would he. By late afternoon, the desert sky grew restless. What had begun as thin clouds on the horizon thickened into a rolling wall of gray, creeping low and heavy as if the heavens were preparing to smother the land. Clara had never seen a storm come so quickly. In town, storms meant shelter, a roof, walls, a fire. Out here, the sky itself was a threat. The Apache noticed before she did. His gaze flicked toward the horizon, his face impassive, but his pace quickened. Clara struggled to keep up, stumbling over stones, her dress snagging on thorny brush. What is it? She called, breathless. Rain, he answered, voice clipped. After a pause, he added, danger. She glanced up at the clouds again. Rain. Can't be worse than the sun. His look silenced her. In his eyes she saw the weight of experience. He knew this land, its cruelties hidden beneath beauty. She bit her tongue and followed. The wind rose, hot at first, then cooling with sudden force. Dust stung her eyes. Her hair whipped loose from its braid, lashing her face as the world around them seemed to shift. The desert no longer baked silently under the sun. It howled, alive and angry. Here, the Apache said sharply, veering toward a cleft in the rocks. Clara scrambled after him, heart pounding as lightning slashed the sky. The air cracked with thunder so close it rattled her teeth. They climbed into a narrow canyon, the walls pressing high on either side. At its end, half hidden by boulders, yawned the mouth of a shallow cave. The Apache ducked inside without hesitation. Clara hesitated a moment. What if this was a trap? But the storm behind her roared, leaving her little choice. She followed him into the dim shelter. The cave was cool and dry, smelling faintly of stone and dust. It wasn't large, just enough space for two people to crouch without touching the walls. Clara sank against the rock, clutching the water skin he'd given her. Her chest heaved from exertion. Outside, the storm struck with fury. Rain fell in sheets, hammering the desert floor, turning dry gullies into rushing torrents. Wind screamed down the canyon, carrying sand and water in wild eddies. Clara shivered, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. She had thought the desert was only heat and thirst, but now she saw its other face, untamed, violent, merciless. The Apache moved with calm efficiency. He gathered small, dry sticks from a bundle he had carried, striking flint until a spark caught. Soon a modest fire flickered, its glow casting warm light across the cave walls. Clara watched him, wary yet strangely comforted. His movements were precise, economical, like a man who had done this 100 times. She envied his certainty. When the fire steadied, he glanced at her. Cold? She hesitated, pride warring with need, then nodded. He gestured toward the fire. Closer. Clara scooted forward, stretching her hands toward the flames. Warmth seeped into her fingers, easing their stiffness. For the first time since fleeing town, she felt a sliver of safety. Fragile, temporary, but real. Silence lingered, broken only by the storm's fury outside. Clara's mind, too tired to guard itself, let words slip free. I have nowhere to go. The admission startled her as much as it seemed to startle him. She had not meant to say it aloud. Yet once spoken, the truth clung to the cave air, undeniable. He regarded her steadily. His expression didn't change, but something in his gaze softened, as if he recognized the weight of her confession. They would have killed me, she whispered, staring into the fire. I didn't steal anything. But in their eyes, that didn't matter. Once someone like Walker says you're guilty, you may as well be. Her voice trembled, and she bit her lip to stop it. She had promised herself she would not cry, not in front of this stranger, not in front of anyone. For a long moment, he said nothing. The fire crackled softly between them. Then, at last, he spoke, his voice low, almost lost beneath the storm. Stay. With me. Clara's breath caught. She turned, searching his face. The words were simple, but not lightly given. They carried no demand, no threat, only a quiet offer. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Part of her wanted to recoil. How could she trust him? Yet another part, the part that remembered the mob's faces twisted in hate, longed to cling to those words like a raft in a flood. The storm raged on outside, but inside the cave, time seemed to pause. Clara stared at him, torn between fear and hope. The firelight flickered across his features, highlighting the stillness in his eyes. He was not a man of many words, she realized, but the ones he spoke seemed to matter more. Stay. With me. And though she said nothing yet, the thought planted itself deep inside her, impossible to ignore. The fires snapped and hissed as the storm battered the world outside. Clara sat rigid beside it, his words echoing in her mind, louder than the thunder. Stay with me. She didn't answer. She couldn't. The offer was too sudden, too heavy. It felt like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading out to touch every corner of her fear. He didn't press her. The Apache remained still across the fire, his posture relaxed but alert, as if he were carved from the very rock of the cave. The flames lit the hard lines of his face, softened the scars that marked his cheek. His eyes, dark and steady, gave nothing away. Clara tore her gaze from him and stared at the flames instead. Why? She whispered. His brow furrowed slightly, as though the question puzzled him. You need. That's not enough. Her voice trembled, but there was steel beneath it. I don't know you. You don't know me. Why would you even care if I live or die? He considered her in silence for a long moment, then answered simply, Because I saw you. The word struck her strangely. Not found you, not helped you, saw you. As though her very existence had become real to him when so many others had. Looked through her. Clara swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in her eyes. If you knew what they said about me, maybe you wouldn't be so quick to offer." "They lie," she flinched. "You don't know that. I know." His voice carried a quiet certainty, no need for argument. "I know when someone runs for life, not for guilt." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him God. How? She wanted to, but years of judgment, of whispers in the town, of being no one's daughter and everyone's charity case, made belief a dangerous thing. She shook her head. "Even if you're right, what then? I can't go back. I can't. I can't live out here." His gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "You can, if you stay." The offer hung between them, as steady as the firelight. He wasn't promising comfort. He wasn't promising safety. He was simply saying she had a place here, beside him. If she chose it. Clara drew her shawl tighter, shivering though the fire's warmth licked her skin. What would that even mean? She asked, her voice small. He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he reached into his pouch and drew out a bundle of dried herbs, placing a pinch into the flames. A fragrant smoke curled upward, sharp and earthy, filling the cave with its scent. "I teach," he said at last. "Water, food, shelter. You learn. You live." Clara stared at him, stunned. "You'd teach me?" "Yes." Her mind raced. To survive out here, she would have to become something she wasn't, a creature of the desert, hardened and cunning. Could she do that? Could she strip away the girl who once carried dishes in a saloon and become someone who belonged to no one's town, no one's rules? Her heart whispered yes, but her fear screamed louder. "What if I can't?" she asked, her voice breaking. He tilted his head, his expression steady. "Then you die." The bluntness shocked her, but there was no cruelty in his tone, only honesty. He spoke to her as if she were strong enough to face the truth, not a fragile thing to be coddled. Clara hugged her knees to her chest, rocking slightly as the storm raged outside. His offer was both a lifeline and a chain. To stay with him meant survival, but it also meant surrendering to a world she did not understand, to a man she barely knew. Yet the alternative was emptiness. To walk out alone would be to die, slow. And forgotten, another lost soul claimed by the desert. Her eyes lifted to him again. He was watching the fire, not her, as though he didn't need her answer tonight, as though he could wait as long as it took. That patience unsettled her more than demands would have. "Stay with me." His voice echoed again in her mind, quiet. Unyielding. Clara closed her eyes, the sound of the storm filling her ears. She didn't speak, but for the first time since her world had collapsed, she let herself imagine what it might feel like to stop running. The storm broke by morning, leaving the desert washed clean and strangely new. Pockets of rainwater shimmered in the low places, and the air carried the sharp scent of damp earth. Clara stepped out of the cave slowly, her limbs stiff from the cold night. The Apache was already awake, already moving, as if he hadn't slept at all. He knelt by one of the shallow pools, filling a gourd with careful precision. His movements were quiet, deliberate, as though nothing in the world could hurry him. Clara hovered near the cave mouth, uncertain. Every instinct urged her to keep her distance, yet she found herself watching him with wary fascination. When he returned, he handed her the gourd without a word. She hesitated, then took it, sipping gratefully. Her thirst eased, but suspicion clung to her. She remembered his offer, those words that haunted her, "Stay with me." She still hadn't answered. "Where are we going?" she asked at last, her voice rough. "North," he said. "What's north?" "Safer ground," Clara frowned. That was no answer at all. But he was already walking, and once again she followed. The desert had changed after the storm. Streams ran in the gullies, and birds circled overhead, their cries sharp in the clear air. Clara stumbled often, her shoes ruined from days of wandering, her feet blistered raw. He noticed but said nothing. Once, when she nearly fell, he caught her arm with a steady hand and righted her before letting go. His touch was firm, impersonal. Yet it lingered in her memory long after. By midday, they reached higher ground where cliffs jutted sharp against the sky. Clara's heart sank when she spotted movement in the distance riders, half a dozen of them, sweeping the land like hunters. Even at this distance she knew what they were, men from town. Her breath caught. "They're looking for me." He followed. Her gaze, his face unreadable. Then he pulled her down into the shadow of a rock outcrop. Quiet. Clara's pulse pounded in her ears as the riders drew closer, their voices carried faintly on the wind. She could make out snatches of conversation. Her name, shouted angrily, threats of what they'd do if they caught her. Fear clawed up her throat. She pressed a hand over her mouth, fighting to stay silent. The Apache crouched beside her, calm as stone. He studied the riders with sharp eyes, measuring their distance, their path. At one point, one of the men turned his horse toward their hiding place. Clara froze. She was certain they'd been seen, certain this was the end. But the Apache reached out, his hand light on her shoulder, grounding her. His eyes met hers steady, commanding. "Do not move." She understood without words. The riders passed by cursing, their horses kicking up mud. Slowly, their voices faded into the distance. Clara let out a shaky breath, her whole body trembling. "They would have found me," she whispered. "Yes," he said simply. "And you stayed." His brow furrowed, as if the statement puzzled him. "Of course." Clara stared at him, unable to reconcile his calm certainty with the danger they had just escaped. In town, no one had lifted a finger for her. Not a single voice had risen in her defense. Yet this man, who owed her nothing, had risked being discovered alongside her. Still, fear gnawed at her. Gratitude warred with doubt. "What if they come?" "Back?" she asked. "Then I hide you again." Her throat tightened. "Why?" He studied her for a long moment, then answered softly, "Because you are mine to protect now." The words struck deep, leaving her shaken. She didn't know whether to feel safe or trapped. Part of her bristled she belonged to no one. Another part, the broken, weary part, ached at the thought of someone claiming her survival as their concern. That night, they camped beneath an overhang of stone. He built a fire small and low, its glow barely more than embers. Clara curled close to its warmth, sleep tugging at her. She thought of the riders' faces, twisted with hate. She thought of his hand on her shoulder, steady and firm, holding her still while danger passed. For the first time, she wondered if trust was not a choice but a slow surrender, carved by moments like these. And though she told herself she would, could not trust him, Clara fell asleep with her heart less heavy than before. The days that followed fell into a rhythm Clara had never known, strange, exhausting, yet undeniably alive. Morning meant walking until the sun grew too harsh, then resting in shade while the Apache showed her how to drink from the heart of a cactus or find coolness beneath stone. Evening meant firelight and silence, the desert sky awash with stars brighter than she had ever imagined. At first, she lingered in her own thoughts, wary and withdrawn. But slowly, the silence between them shifted. It was no longer heavy with distrust, but filled with a strange, tentative peace. She learned his name. "Taza," he said simply one night. After days of avoiding the subject, she repeated it softly, testing the sound. "Taza." He nodded once. Then his gaze fixed on her, steady. "And you?" "Clara," she whispered, almost shy. She hadn't spoken her name aloud since fleeing town. To hear it here, in the quiet vastness, made it feel new again, untethered from the judgment that had chased her. Taza inclined his head. "Clara." That night, something changed. They spoke more, halting at first, but with growing ease. She asked about plants, about the sky, about the scars on his hands. He never offered long stories, only quiet truths. This herb for fever, that bird means. Water, these scars from battles he no longer described. His words were few, but each carried weight. In return, she shared fragments of herself. She told him of her mother's lullabies, long forgotten by most but etched into her memory. She told him of the boarding house where she had worked, of how the town watched her with suspicion even before Walker's lie. Sometimes she stopped mid-sentence, ashamed of her bitterness, but Taza never interrupted, never judged. He listened with the patience of stone. One afternoon, he handed her a knife. "Cut here," he instructed, showing her how to peel bark. "From a branch." She hesitated, uncertain, but followed his guidance. The blade slipped once, nicking her finger. Blood welled bright against her skin. She hissed in pain. Taza caught her hand quickly, turning it palm up. His touch was firm but careful as he wrapped the cut with a strip torn from his own cloth. His eyes met hers, dark and steady. "Small wound, it heals." Clara's chest tightened. It wasn't just the care he gave, but the simple certainty in his tone, as if healing were inevitable. She realized she believed him more than she believed herself. The days wore on, and with them came small victories. Clara managed to build a fire on her own, though it took endless attempts and a great deal of muttering under her breath. She found water in a hollow stone where she never would have looked before. Each success lit something inside her, a spark of pride she hadn't felt in years. At night, they often sat in silence by the fire, but it was no longer the silence of strangers. It was companionable, like the hush between two who no longer needed words. One night, she found herself watching him as he worked an arrowhead with steady hands. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, the calm in his eyes. She thought of the men who had hunted her, their faces twisted in rage. She thought of Taza's hand steadying her when panic nearly gave her away. "You could have left me," she said quietly. He paused, glancing up. "Yes, why didn't you?" His gaze lingered on her, unreadable as always. Then he set the arrow aside. "Because alone is death. Together is life." Clara swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to argue, to insist she wasn't his burden, but the words faltered. She realized, with startling clarity, that he didn't see her as a burden at all. He saw her as, what? A partner? A companion? For the first time, she didn't feel like someone merely tolerated. She felt seen. That night, she lay awake beneath the blanket of stars, listening to his even breathing beside the fire. Trust was still a fragile thing in her, brittle and uncertain. But something deeper stirred beneath it, a kinship, unexpected and undeniable, born not of words but of shared silence, shared survival. The bond was fragile, but it was growing. And Clara, for the first time since the town cast her out, no longer felt utterly alone. The desert had become Clara's teacher. She no longer stumbled with every step, no longer mistook every sound for danger. Her skin bore the sun's burn. Her hands carried new calluses, but her spirit, worn thin when she first fled, had begun to mend. Still, shadows of the past clung to her. They returned one morning when she and Taza crouched atop a ridge, scanning the valley below. At first, Clara thought the figures in the distance were travelers. Then she saw the way their horses moved in a tight line, the rifles slung across their shoulders, the way one of them pointed toward the horizon. She recognized a hat even at that distance, broad-brimmed, the kind the sheriff always wore. Her stomach dropped. "They found me." Taza studied them calmly, his eyes narrowing against the sun. "They follow." Clara's breath came fast. "We can't fight them." "No." "Then what do we do?" He turned his gaze to her, steady as always. "We choose." The word struck her harder than the sight of the riders. Choose. For so long, her life had been dictated by others, accusations, judgments, orders shouted over her head. Even running had been less a choice than a last desperate reflex. Now, Taza was telling her the decision was hers. She stared down at the riders, her heart racing. Part of her wanted to believe there was still a chance, however small, that if she returned, she could clear her name. But deep down, she knew the truth. The mob had already passed its sentence. Going back meant chains or worse. I don't belong there, she whispered. Taza's expression did not change, but something in his gaze softened. Then belong here? Clara turned to him, stunned by the simplicity of it. Belong. The word felt strange on her tongue, like something she had never been allowed to imagine. But I don't know how, she admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know how to be what you are. You do not need to be me, he said. You be Clara. The words wrapped around her like a shield. Fragile but strong got below, the riders fanned out, searching the valley. Clara felt panic clawing at her again, but when Taza placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, the fear ebbed. He was not promising safety. He was promising presence. She drew a shaky breath. Then I stay. The words came out quieter than she expected, but they carried a finality that settled into her bones. Zia nodded once, no triumph in his eyes, only acceptance. Good. They moved quickly after that, slipping through the narrow paths only. He seemed to know. By dusk, the riders were far behind, their shouts swallowed by distance. Clara collapsed by the fire that night, exhaustion weighing her down, but for the first time in weeks, she felt no fear of pursuit. She had chosen her path, and it led away from the town, away from the lies, away from a life where she had never been wanted. Taza sat across from her, sharpening his knife in quiet rhythm. She watched him in the firelight, realizing the bond. Between them was no longer just necessity. It was trust. Fragile still, but real. You could have walked away that first day, she said softly. Why didn't you? He paused, meeting her gaze. Because I saw you. The same words he had spoken before, but now she understood. He had seen her desperation, her will to live even when everything else was gone. He had seen more than. The fugitive of the town had named her. He had seen Clara. Her throat tightened. She lowered her eyes, letting the silence speak what she could not. The desert night stretched wide above them, stars burning bright and endless. Clara lay back on her blanket, gazing at them, and for the first time, she felt the weight of freedom. It was not safety, not yet, but it was hers. She thought of the town, of faces turned cold, of voices raised against her. Then she thought of Taza's quiet voice, steady as stone, offering her a place when she had none. Stay with me. She had chosen, and together, they walked a new path into a life neither of them had planned, but both of them, perhaps, had always been moving toward.